right, guys. Hi, I'm Dr. Erin, host of the Trial Site News podcast. And today we have Dr. Robert Malone with us. Dr. Malone, thank you for joining.
My pleasure. How can I help you today, Erin?
Well, so let's talk about the news first, if you don't mind, where the head of the CDC basically went against her own advisors. That's at least for that one part when it came to boosters. That's unusual, right?
Highly unusual, and also went against the VRBPAC. So the independent advisory group for the FDA didn't endorse this, and the independent advisory group ACIP did not endorse this, but the director of the FDA did, and the director of the CDC did.
So what does that mean?
I think so. If I'm well, that's a question that has like a million levels. But I think what you're saying is probably what does it mean for the average person? It could be that you're asking what does it mean in terms of the politics of all this, and that's a different question. But in terms of the average person, I think that this has the appearance, this additional clause that they've added. First was added by Janet Woodcock, who will be leaving the FDA in the next month, in theory, although her replacement has not been appointed. So she was the one that added it over the objection of her advisory group. And what it is basically, it gives them the latitude to mandate vaccines for anyone that has any public contact, broadly written. So this is healthcare personnel all the way down to the guy that bags your groceries, or gal. And so how do you define who has contact with the public? Well, it's pretty much everybody that has a job, right? So it appears that what they've done is backdoored without any data to support it. The ability to carry on with the mandate agenda that they wish to advance over the objections of the independent review groups that have said there's no scientific basis for doing this, and we don't have the data to support doing it, and so you shouldn't do it yet. And they basically just said, I don't care what you guys think and gals. We're just going to do it anyhow, which gets to my point. I think to my eyes, the FDA and the CDC are increasingly beyond the law. They don't feel the need to comply in any way, even lip service really, with policies, procedures, legal requirements like the common rule or anything else. They pretty much are comfortable just doing whatever it is that they want to do.
It's interesting, when I saw what they did, I said, well, I don't know. I feel like that's going to increase vaccine hesitancy more than anything. When you see somebody go against their advisors, I mean, and not just for this vaccine, but I always think about the next pandemic, God forbid, but like, how is the public going to respond? Are they going to trust you? That's what I'm always thinking about.
Yeah, not to mention the whole vaccine enterprise, pediatric vaccines all the way through. This is increasing vaccine hesitancy for the traditional pediatric vaccines. As you know, I'm with you. I've been saying this all the way along. They are compromising the entire vaccine enterprise for this short-term ability to act unilaterally to enforce what they believe, or I'm presuming that they believe it is what's in the common interest and the best for the nation economically and otherwise. But I disagree that this is good policy at multiple levels. It's not consistent with the science. It's as a public health professional, And I respect you're more better trained in this than I am as an MPH. You know that this isn't right, and the messaging isn't right, and it's going to have consequences.
Yeah, it makes
So
the
then
messaging
the
difficult.
the next question you're probably going to ask is why, I suspect, because
I've been
that's the
asking why
question
all along.
yeah, that's the question I'm getting all over the world.
Yeah.
Is the why question. And the answer is somehow increasingly dark, for me at least. It's harder and harder for me to strike the balance that I seek of presuming good intent. It's just getting really difficult to do that for me, and I regret that. There was a piece on Rogan the other day with Eric Weinstein, in which he said, I'm trying to be happy and put a good face on all this, but I'm burning inside. I absolutely hate that. He made some statements about the Surgeon General and about the director of the CDC, that basically the CDC lies, and he has absolutely no respect for the Surgeon General anymore. And he hates being in that position of feeling that. But I think a lot of us are there. And to what end? The one of the things that's come out over the last few days is that the information linking the genetic characterization of the parent virus with to what strongly appears to be a genetically engineered strain, that because of the furin cleavage site, the homology of the furin cleavage site to a human protein, the engineering of those sequences to optimize the codon utilization, this is all smoking gun for gain of function research. And then we have all the paper documents. So we have the sequence elements now, and we have the paper trail, and that continues to evolve. And it's increasingly difficult to come to any conclusion other than this originated in a laboratory. And it originated in a laboratory that was funded by the NIH, NIAID, and Defense Threat Reduction Agency, and that it was research performed in the Wuhan lab in China. And it's increasingly hard to come into any other conclusion. And we had this, now Lancet has come out, as you saw, with this piece saying that we have to take this seriously and this has to be rigorously investigated. And it's notable that that piece was published after Biden got his report back from the intelligence community that he had said he was absolutely going to get to the bottom of this. And he got the report back and he basically said, I'm paraphrasing, the intelligence community tells me that we can't get to the bottom of this, after saying that he was going to get to the bottom of it. And, as somebody who deals with these guys, their fingerprints are all over it. Well, so no surprise they can't get to the bottom of it. What I'm leading to is, if we took as a working hypothesis, you and me, we can talk about working hypotheses. If we took as a working hypothesis that in fact this is a product of gain of function research, it is a product of a cooperative agreement between the US government and the Chinese government. Somehow it got out. We can't resolve that. Was it, an infected monkey that a technician sold out the back door to the wet market, or was it intentional, or who knows? But it sure looks in the paper trail supports that this came out of this funded research from the US government to the CCCP. So we've got fingerprints on both sides on that one. If that was to be the case, if we take that as our working hypothesis, and trying to be empathetic. Imagine yourself being a senior official in the U.S. government in the Department of Health and Human Services. Imagine yourself to be, say, the director of the NIH or the director of the NIAID, not naming names. What would your response be? I would be overwhelmed by guilt. I would be frantic. And if this was to be the case, then it might explain this irrational behavior on the part of the government and the senior officials in the government. I mean, I'm sure you haven't heard any of these rumors, but I've heard rumors coming from the CDC that staffers are saying one thing about what's going on, but senior management is saying different things, and it just doesn't add up, and I don't know how to explain it.
So you're saying they would feel overwhelmed with guilt and then overcompensate with, that means they really care.
That's I might do that. I would probably come clean. Okay.
I would come clean. I had a teacher
Yeah.
at West Point, one of my old commanders, and he always said, DTRT, do the right thing. So I think, I mean, right, like that's just being ethical, and you're dealing with public health, people's health. That's the most sacred thing.
So Aaron, I'm in the middle of editing Bobby Kennedy's book on Tony Fauci, and I'm supposed to write the prologue. It's probably what I should be doing right now instead of doing a podcast.
Sorry,
with you,
Mr. Kennedy.
I would way rather talk to you. But I think that when you read it, you're going to be blown away, because what we're seeing here almost precisely parallels what happened in the HIV story. As if a series of kind of tools for managing public policy and managing information, managing the press, were pioneered during the AIDS crisis, and the interaction between the NIAID and Big Pharma, and that's just, it's like the same script with the same players, because they're still all there. And as I've walked through what Bobby has documented, it's hard for me to read because it's depressing. I mean, it's good. It's a good read. He's on fire in writing it, but the facts and information, and it's well documented, that flows out. You can't help but be struck by the parallels.
I mean, I wonder though, how much of this is more of like that regulatory capture, that relationship between big pharma, industry, and government, and just it's all about profit. It's all about the Benjamins. Like I feel.
Right. So I read an interesting analysis. I think it was from somebody in the UK the other day, who made the point that basically with the FDA, we have a similar situation to what's happened at the USDA. I mean, no, I'm sorry, CDC. In that the CDC has a mission to promote vaccines and vaccine uptake. And they also have a mission to evaluate vaccine safety. Those are in conflict. And the big money that they've received is not for vaccine safety, it's for vaccine promotion. So that's the economic driver that they're getting, is vaccine promotion, not careful evaluation of safety data. They're not getting big cash to do that mission. And the advocacy position that I was reading was that it would be going forward, one change that should be done is that the CDC should be split. And the whole vaccines for children and the vaccine promotion and advocacy mission space should be separated from the safety monitoring, oversight, public health monitoring function of CDC, because the two are in conflict.
I understand that conflict of interest. And I think that's kind of, when I wrote an op-ed on Trial Site about the boosters, because I saw, when President Biden announced that he'd be available on September 20th, and I was like, well, they haven't even looked at the data yet. So it just seems like that was always what they were going to go with, to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, like all these advisors, yeah. What's the point? I don't know.
Yeah, it was preordained.
Yeah,
But,
exactly.
So there was some interesting quotes from the VRBAC when they met, and it was in press from one of the key leaders at the VRBAC that, paraphrasing, basically said, well, this report where they overwhelmingly voted against the boosters, except for the 65 and older and high-risk persons, only 2 votes against. He made the point that this will show to the public that we are truly independent and will make a rigorous evaluation when we are asked to do so. I took that as snark. That was basically pointing out that the VRBAC, despite standard FDA policy, had not been convened for the decision about the licensure. Recall, wind back to the remember the big push, oh, we've licensed the vaccine now, we can mandate it to everybody because we're not going to be constrained by the common rule, was basically the logic, because it'll no longer be an experimental product. And then I kind of tore that apart and said, well, no, actually Comirnaty and Pfizer has now been split, and Comirnaty isn't actually available yet, and all that kind of stuff. But one of the key clauses in that letter from the FDA was they stated explicitly that the VRBAC had not been convened and consulted because there was no reason to, because there was no controversy. No controversy about the vaccines. It's right there in the authorization letter. So there's that one, that little pearl, and then there's the pearl in that authorization letter in which the FDA explicitly says that BioNTech is going to have to do safety studies, more rigorous safety studies, because the safety database structure, including the VRBAC, the VAERS system, is inadequate to detect rare adverse events for these vaccines. So they said it flat out in writing, in the letter, VAERS, be safe, and all that is inadequate to detect these rare adverse events and characterize them. And they're going to require BioNTech to do formal studies, follow-up studies, phase 4, to better characterize these things. So you had these 2 clauses. We're not going to convene the outside advisory panel because there's no controversy. And, oh, by the way, we have no ability to accurately assess the adverse events. And so I'm pretty sure that comment from one of the senior members of the VRBAC was letting the public know that had they been consulted for the licensure decision, they would have done their job, but they were not consulted.
Interesting, very detailed. Way to pick that up, Dr. Malone. You must have done this the majority of your life, vaccine regulation and all that. Have you ever seen anything like this before?
Never.
Okay.
So that was one of the fascinating things in spending 2 weeks in Europe was this encountering physicians and scientists and politicians and the press from all over the world, because that's what the International COVID Summit was. And then traveling to Portugal, we thought we were going to have a little vacation and go to a horse show, and instead we were just inundated with more interview requests and meetings and such. And one of them, which was a recorded and live streamed interview from a well-established journalist in Portugal. They gave me a translator for real time in participating in this kind of 3 physicians and a journalist roundtable that went on for about 2 hours, and including a Q&A. And one of the folks in the audience, and this was an audience of high-profile physicians and politicians and others that were invited, basically said, we had always believed that the FDA and the CDC were the gold standard for the world. And now we see that they're at least as corrupt, if not more corrupt, than things are here in Portugal, which is an interesting statement, because if you look at the corruption ranking in Europe, Portugal is one notch below or above, depending on how you say it, more corrupt than Italy, which is infamously corrupt. So that was a kind of a mind-bending point of view. Is Europeans have lost faith in the American regulatory system, and I think for good reason. That's what I see, and it leaves the rest of the world a little bit at a loss, because they've always thought they could lean on the states for rigor and objectivity.
I just think, I keep picturing this large belly. I know it's a metaphor here, but like I just like where people are gonna pierce it. And like they haven't bumped into it yet, but they're gonna pierce it, and then it's just gonna unleash just wrath. I don't know. People are just gonna lose it. I don't know. Because it just feels like when you describe that burning feeling inside, that was probably a bad metaphor, forgive me. But when you're like thinking about that, that's what I feel like. I feel like we're waiting for something to come over the top. Because I'm not really sure how else this story is going to end. Something has to give, right?
Yeah.
I think.
So the problem with going the legal route, which many people are doing, is that it's so slow and kludgy. And meantime, they're racing to jab everybody through the mandates. And what's happened is that coalition, largely of southern states, of red states, has come together and is resisting the federal mandates. And this is now playing straight into the political arena in a big way, as you know. It is realigning the political axis, because it's no longer left and right. It's personal freedom versus the collective. And you have this enormous overlay of authoritarianism that the Europeans are really sensitized to. They're seeing it. You know this from the protests in France. In Australia, we've got police lines firing rubber bullets at protesters over vaccines. I mean, this is Looney Tunes, right? Portugal was a fascinating situation in another way. In the 70s, they had what's called the Carnation Revolution. They were under a fascist authoritarian dictatorship up until the mid-70s, Salazar regime. And so a lot of the people I was interacting with, which are old gray hairs like me, they remember that. That for them, that is not history. That is part of their life experience. And they're very aware of creeping authoritarianism. And they don't like it very much. And they're in these two lengthy interactions I had with these collections of thought leaders and politicians, et cetera, that I had when I was in Portugal. The experience of being under a fascist dictatorship was repeatedly mentioned. And the experience of, it was said, we could never even have this meeting that we're having right now with about 50 people. Back then, that would not be possible. We could not have this meeting to discuss these matters. So here in the States, we're kind of spoiled. We haven't had that experience, and so we think it won't happen. You're, I went to Italy and Portugal, okay? They get it about authoritarian dictatorships, right? Il Duce and Salazar. That this is not theoretical for them. So it's a different landscape, and then I've been on podcasts with Australians. They're just stunned at what's happened to them.
Yeah.
Australia was supposed to be, Crocodile Dundee, and
Great movie, but yeah,
we're out in the outback.
yeah. I mean, here in America, I mean, it's just like mandate censorship, and I think it takes a while for your brain to sort of catch all of it or something. I don't know. It's just or to understand, like, wow, this is actually happening. I mean, I've talked when it comes to mandates,
and then
I've
it's
talked
too late.
then it's too late. I've talked to blue collar workers. I talked to a lot of people about the vaccine, and they don't feel comfortable getting this vaccine. And I honor personal choice. I think that's important from a public health perspective. Whatever that person feels comfortable doing. And now that person who doesn't have a lot of money in the bank is trying to hire some kind of legal help so they can keep their job, just so they can put food on the table. And I'm like, how did we get here? It's just, or they have to pay for a test. And I've heard different companies are saying different things. One company I heard said like 3 times a week, which is absurd. You can't, it's not doable. Another one said 1 time a week. So now these people have to figure out a way to pay for these tests. They don't have money. So who is this policy hurting? A rich person might be like, okay, well, I'll just take the test every week if they don't want to get the vaccine.
I can speak to this. So I've spent 2 weeks in countries that have green cards. So this is vaccine passports. And even though I'm vaccinated and I had my CDC vaccine card, I had to be tested before I flew into Italy. Okay, so that was a huge hassle, scheduling that and getting it done. And just a sec, somebody's trying to call me. And then when I landed, you have to show evidence of having been negative within the last 48 hours, typically 48 to 72, depending on the context. So over the last 2 weeks, I've been tested 4 or 5 times. And each time you have to schedule it. You have to have a break in your day or whatever your routine is, go do it. And there it was, these are rapid tests. So it wasn't in the States, it was the deep probe, which some people call nasal rape, which, by the way, if you've had that, I can't imagine a better way to break the nasal epithelial barrier and enable respiratory virus infection. They're in there with a shovel way up in your brain.
I had that done.
And fortunately, for the rapid test, they were like, "Oh, we just barely touch you," and it was okay. It's a little uncomfortable. It was also a little weird to be treated as a celebrity by the people doing it. So to have the pharmacist do this and then say, "And can I have a selfie?" It's a little weird. But that was kind of the experience. And so having been through that, where I had 4 or 5 in the span of 2 weeks, despite it was 20 euros each time, right? So that's like $25. Not too bad, but not nothing if you're a person working a construction job or something. And then all of this disruption and hassle and scheduling and finding the pharmacy to do it and blah, 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 blah. It just was totally disruptive. So that's logic, that's just punitive.
Yeah, it is.
That's what it is.
It is. And it's
just punitive.
And like I always say, like, what's going to happen the next time around in the next pandemic,
and further to the point, okay, is that the vaccines do not fully protect you from infection, virus replication, and shedding. So whether it's a green card in Europe or vaccine passport or whatever you want to call it, just because you've had the jab doesn't mean that you're not going to infect everybody else. And here's the new thing, the wrinkle to this, Aaron, is a case can be made because the vaccines are providing protection from serious illness. So in general, if you get infected with Delta and you're vaccinated, you'll have as much virus replication in your body as the unvaccinated person, but you're not going to feel so sick. Okay, what does that translate to? Oh, I can just go to work, right? So if you think it through, this takes a little bit of, you got to take a moment and process it for a minute. The vaccinated are actually the ones that are creating the highest risk for everybody, because they're still going to be able to be infected, replicate virus at least at the levels, if not higher, than the unvaccinated. They're still shedding, coughing, spewing, whatever, vaccine all over the place, virus, just like as if they were unvaccinated, but they feel good. And so they are, by definition, set up to be super spreaders.
Okay, wait, why would they feel good if they have symptoms?
Remember, the symptoms are much more mild.
Much more mild. Okay. But they still have the
Yep.
same viral load, is what?
They still have the same viral load,
Okay.
if not higher.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So that scenario with a high reproductive number is not good.
Yeah, I think so. I think you've figured that out. It takes a moment to kind of do the mental backflip, because all we're told is, oh, this is an outbreak of the unvaccinated, and it's the unvaccinated the threat to all of us. And now we haven't even scratched the surface of selection of mutants.
Right. And I always say too, like most of the world is unvaccinated. Like the rich countries are talking about boosters. And then the highest risk people in so many other countries don't even have one shot. And it's an airborne global virus. So, I mean, you can make the case for, right, that helping them or focusing on getting their highest risk taken care of will help us. But
so thank you for tossing me that
here you go.
lead, an opportunity to talk about my meeting with Cardinal Turkson.
Yes, and he is the Vatican. Wait, what is he had? He had something. Vatican COVID coalition.
He is in charge of all the COVID committees for the Vatican. Okay, now Cardinal Turkson is considered to be, if not next in line, pretty close to the Pope. So it wasn't just a random guy I got in to see. My Catholic friends here in the States lobbied really hard to get me in to see him.
Wow.
And it was down to the wire. You know, I got a call that morning, and I had to basically step out of the meeting I was there for. I didn't get to. I presented at the Senate in Rome, but then I had to scoot and go over to the Vatican, which was a little weird. It was inside the Vatican. You had to, you can't just walk into Vatican City, hi, I'm a tourist. Doesn't happen. There's the Swiss guards and everything, and the Swiss guards are not like in pretty little suits holding little artificial spears. They're walking around with their M16s in camo, and their camo painted Land Rovers. It's not all pretty. He's from Ghana, by the way, and so highly influential, the guy to talk to about all this topic. And he gave me over an hour. So he was not, we talked about many things. Some things I'm holding back, I'm not discussing. I felt that they were kind of private. that he was sharing information with me to demonstrate to me that he understood the points I was making. But suffice to say, the church is aware that the vaccines have risk. But he was not aware that the vaccines have these problems of relatively short durability and what we're calling breakthroughs that are fairly frequent. So all the Vatican has received Pfizer, by the way. So good to know. So he was also not really attuned to the latest information about early treatment, which is the whole focus of the International COVID Summit. So these were my main communications in meeting with him, was to share this information about the current state of the art in terms of knowledge about the vaccine durability and effectiveness and the breakthroughs, and that these mandates that the church is, the Pope is strongly behind. And it's important to note that the Pope is apparently quite tight with Dr. Fauci. So what became clear is that these committees that have been set up are receiving some fairly filtered points of view. So because otherwise what I had to say would not have been novel, right? They should have known all this stuff. And I also spoke about the benefits of these various anti-inflammatory early interventions. And he wasn't fully up on that, but he shared some personal examples that made it very clear to me that he understood that there's a variety of agents that can be used early in infection that drastically reduce the risk of death and disease. So he's an elderly gentleman. We spoke very carefully. He took voluminous notes, and then shared with me these anecdotes that made it clear to me that he understood the issues. But there was no commitments about action items on his part. There will be a Vatican-sponsored COVID summit, I think, coming up in a couple of months, maybe even a month. And I wasn't invited to that. I didn't ask for that. Really just wanted to share information. But I also spoke to him about the equity thing that you just spoke about. And he shared with me that it had been the church that had been the driver in this push that you may remember a few months ago, in which there was a advocacy for debt forgiveness so that emerging economies would have the capital to buy vaccines. And there was also a push for sharing intellectual property rights so that more vaccine could be manufactured and could be manufactured in some of these regions, which was rejected, as you'll recall. But I hadn't been aware that the church was the one pushing all that.
I was not aware of that either.
Yeah, so that came out of his committees.
Oh.
So good on them.
Yeah.
I had described aspects of this situation that are very have the appearance of being I'm trying to select my words here so that I don't overstate or get anybody in trouble. I shared that there's the appearance of a certain amount of economic imperialism going on with the vaccine deployment, and that there's appearances and evidence that some of this deployment is now being used strategically. to advance um, political agendas of nation states that control these vaccines. And he shared that he was very aware, coming from Ghana, that the entire chain, distribution chain, top to bottom, is being complicated by opportunistic activities, economic activities. So, so they clearly, to the extent that he represents the Catholic Church, has quite a sophisticated understanding of the landscape of what's going on here. Although wasn't apprised fully of the limitations of the current vaccine products, and nor of their adverse event profiles. We didn't focus on the adverse events. That was intentional on my part. I just didn't want to kind of go there and make this a big, come across as an anti-vaxxer or anything. I was there trying to share pragmatic information with him, trying to advocate that the church might pivot slightly from their, universal vaccination stance, and that they align themselves with the WHO more, that given the limited supply, it's better that we, as you were saying, that we deploy vaccine for the elders in the high risk, but particularly emphasize the elders, because they're kind of village memory, city memory, country memory, state memory. They are the repository of knowledge, when you think about it, for all of these regions and cultures. And they're, in addition to the morbidly obese and the other high risk, they're the ones that are getting taken out. And that's a huge cultural loss, whether you're in an established economy or an emerging economy. And so that's the other key part of the pitch that I made is that,
well, that's great.
This was an opportunity for the church to exert some moral leadership.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see what else they do going forward. I guess he has to talk to the Pope.
Yeah, who is all in on universal vaccination.
Yeah.
One of the issues he raised that is important, I think, to think through, and giving the benefit of the doubt to everybody, is he raised the issue of the position of the church in favor of doing selfless things to protect thy neighbor, to protect your fellow man, and that they really supported the idea of universal vaccination in it being a selfless act to benefit the community as a whole. And so I acknowledge this, and acknowledge that I share that belief, as demonstrated by my running around doing free podcasts and everything else, and not getting compensated for all this stuff. I'm not making a buck on this, but I said to him, I share your commitment to community service and to benefiting the common good. And if we had perfect vaccines, then that would be super. But here we're asking people to sacrifice and make sacrifices for the common good in the belief that it would get us to full protection and recovery and normalcy, and the ability to be with our families and travel and everything else. And we can't get there with these products. They aren't sufficiently potent and they aren't sufficiently durable to meet that endpoint. And this is, you're talking about looking forward. What are things like 6 months from now? What are they like before the next election, by the way? My sense, my crystal ball says that we're going to go through and experience more like Israel is currently experiencing,
Oh no,
where it
seriously?
becomes where it becomes abundantly clear that the vaccinated are getting infected and ending up at the hospital and dying. And if when that plays out after these mandates, I use the word social contract. I mean, the social contract will be rendered asunder. It'll be destroyed. The social contract that if I take this self-sacrifice and risk these adverse events, it's for the common good and it's to protect us all. And then people are going to have to come to terms with the fact that they've been misled.
So Israel's
And
how many months ahead of us? December, did they start?
yeah, so it's like, and they did it in a bolus, right? Because they're all compliant for the most part.
And just one vaccine, Pfizer.
Precisely. So, and now they're up to, triple jabs, quadruple jabs. So people are saying 4 to 6 months.
Oh my gosh. Oh,
So then
that's your prediction.
we're looking is that, like, January, February, right when the seasonal respiratory virus surge really peaks.
And it'll probably be a different variant.
It's looking like that.
This is a prediction
So
for all our viewers. Prediction.
risk assessment, let's call it that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And risk mitigation.
Yeah.
So along the lines of risk mitigation, one of the good news things from the International COVID Summit, where we had all these doctors coming together from all over the world to talk about what they're doing, is it just is abundantly clear that your vitamin D levels need to be tuned up. And almost all of us are vitamin D deficient. Now, Aaron, as a public health official, you've probably shared my sense of being perplexed about seasonal respiratory viruses and why exactly. I mean, we've all shared this story with each other that it's because, well, in the winter, we have more disruptions of our respiratory epithelium, the weather's drier, we're indoors, we're with all our friends, and, things spread. That's right. That's pretty much the party line. So the data come in pretty compelling that you can explain all of this with levels of vitamin D in populations. And as you move into the winter, the vitamin D levels drop below critical threshold. And that is pretty well aligned with the seasonality of a lot of these respiratory viruses. So again and again and again, the messaging was get your D levels checked. And if they're not up to par, get them up to par by taking vitamin D, and yes, you can overdose on vitamin D. That's the point. This is worth going to your doc over and getting a vitamin D level drawn and then getting on the right supplement and retesting and making sure you're up to snuff, because getting to the right level of vitamin D seems to be huge in providing protection from this virus, from the disease part. So I think that's one of the good news things in terms of protecting yourself.
Something anybody can do. And they have to find a good supplement because, sometimes there's supplements out there that don't advertise correctly about their ingredients.
Precisely. Yeah. So this is actually, you'd say vitamin D, I can just get vitamin D. This actually there's merit to doing this properly and going to see your doc and getting the blood levels done.
Yeah.
And while you're at it, get a good metabolic panel.
Yeah.
And get ready. Boosting up with vitamin D after you have the infection is kind of the horse has already left the barn and you're trying to close the barn door.
Yeah.
So get it done now and reduce the risk of serious disease this winter for yourself and your family.
Thank you, Dr. Malone. Well, I only have like 2 minutes. We're already over time. Is there anything else from the International COVID Summit in Europe that you'd want to share, like bullet points?
So that we don't have to be, and this is, if we're going to close this up, this is my big message to your audience. You've been given so much of a fear message, just fear and fear and fear. And frankly, that's in the interest of big media. This is how they sell their product. And you don't have to be afraid. If you're in one of these high-risk groups, absolutely get vaccinated. But your children, the probability, unless your children have major pre-existing conditions, the probability of them getting death or disease, severe disease from this, is a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent. It is tiny. And frankly, the risk of them, particularly male children, getting damaged from the vaccine is much higher than that. It's still a fraction of a percent, but the ratio is not encouraging. Number one, you don't have to be consumed by fear about this for almost all of us. And for those that are at high risk, get the jab for sure until the data change. But that's the way it looks to me. And then find, good practices. Find some docs that you're comfortable going to that will give you early treatment should you get infected. And to the extent that you can get testing periodically, if you come down with symptoms and you're perplexed, is this respiratory syncytial virus? Is this rhinovirus? Is this flu? Who knows? I've got upper respiratory symptoms. Don't just assume that it's SARS-CoV-2. Could be any of those other things. Get a test. And if you're positive, get to the doc right away. Work with a doc that will give you early treatment. And the probability of you dying or ending up in the hospital is tiny. So we don't have to be consumed by fear. That's my big message here. And I hope that's a good take home for everybody. In terms of the U.S. government and all the crazy, I think the only way to fix that is going to be at the ballot box. I'm sorry to say. And for those that have to take the jab that don't want to take the jab, I post stuff on Twitter at RW Malone MD that specifically relates to the vaccine mandates and templates for how you can respond to your boss, the legal position that you can take, what your rights are, those kinds of things. But I'm afraid that for a lot of us, a lot of folks that don't wish to accept vaccine for whatever reason and are mandated in the workplace, you may face the situation where, like many nurses are experiencing, where you've got to make a choice of taking the jab or losing your job. And I wish that wasn't the case. It's not right, in my opinion.
Yeah, it doesn't feel ethical at all.
Yeah.
And then these nurses, these are heroes taking care of patients. And then you're fired. Yeah. Not down with that government at all.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. The public has to let the government also know how they feel for sure. But that's good to know about those resources. Because I know people who are in that situation.
What we're doing on so that's with Twitter, and then with the globalcovidsummit.org, we're building this as a fully curated body of information, including podcasts, webcasts, manuscripts, other things, that is really going to be largely designed for medical professionals, but everybody can look in on it. This is why we have, for the Rome Summit Physicians Declaration, we're just restricting it to physicians and healthcare scientists. We're now in a situation with a hostile press that's constantly attacking us and demeaning us and making statements that we're all crazy Proud Boys. or religious fanatics.
Dear
And,
Lord.
yeah, but that's where we're down to. So
Yeah.
so this website is set up, and as your audience over time watches, you'll see that we'll be providing curated information that's responsible, solid, coming from licensed professionals, and we're bound. We're determined that we're going to break this wall of reinforcing the dominant narrative and whatever the government says, and providing people with real information. But until then, the @RW Malone MD Twitter feed is, as you know, Aaron, is a rich source of the latest information, key articles, key scientific publications. And I try to keep my editorial to a minimum and let people think for themselves.
That's good. Yeah, no, I know you try to, you ask questions, which is a good way.
Just
You think Eli Wiesel, I think I heard him talk once, and he said, he obviously fantastic man, and he said, ask questions. Questions don't cause wars, answers do. I always like that.
that's lovely.
Yeah.
My position is just, I read these books from this old Greek guy named Socrates.
Socrates. Yeah,
and
you're
I
doing.
took him to heart.
He's smart too.
But when I was traveling, well, he takes the position I don't know anything, right? And everything is questioned.
Yeah.
I also got some feedback when I was in Europe that I'm coming across like Cicero, and I'm okay with that.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, Dr. Malone, thank you so much. At some point, I'll check. I know you're super busy now and famous, but my other podcast, Causes or Cures, when I first interviewed you, the Ebola story, I'm still interested in that, the Ebola vaccine. So I know everybody's like in
Cool.
yeah, so I still want to hear that when you have a chance.
Let's do that.
Yeah.
That'll be fun, and it'll be a distraction from
It's
the
a
usual.
distraction.
So,
Yeah. Instead of COVID, here's some Ebola. Okay.
it's Aaron. It's always a great pleasure to talk to you.
Likewise.
I just your warmth and your practical nature and kind of groundedness is just refreshing. So thank
Well,
you.
thanks. I try. Not perfect, but I try. And thanks to all of our viewers for tuning in and all your comments, suggestions. Appreciate all of that, and definitely subscribe.